Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. Welcome back to GFA Missions Podcast Reach Church. Again, Marshall Fant here. Very thankful for GFA sponsoring this podcast and all they do, so thanks to the staff. And I think personally today's podcast is going to be very, very valuable. Jason Rochester, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so Jason, I've been familiar with his family for quite a while, so in the pastoral world, Jason, there's certain partnerships you form as a pastor. And we formed a partnership with the company, your dad's company, and your company you work for. So launch into the topic for us. So tell everybody, and again, I'm biased towards your company. So this is not a this is not a commercial, but this is a very it's an information that wherever the church goes and gets partners with an insurance company. That's the topic. So introduce yourself and how you ended up where you are at this stage of life.
Thanks, Marsh. It's a pleasure to be with everybody and to be with you to talk about insurance risk management, particularly in the focus on church safety and security. I think for a lot of ministries, when they think about insurance, they know they have to have it. And it's one of those necessary evils that's in place. But as far as what coverages they have, are they sufficient? And then even risk management and how that helps structure their policy, something that can be very foreign for ministry. So I came out of the ministry world. So I was an associate pastor in Pennsylvania until 2013. Okay. When the Lord moved my family back to South Carolina, and I jumped on board with my family's insurance agency. It's a third generation agency. That's formerly Rochester Insurance. And then beginning of 2021, we formed a partnership with our underwriting carrier, Brotherhood Mutual insurance company, to form American Church Group of South Carolina. So we work with churches, Christian colleges, Christian schools, Christian camps all over the state.
And mission boards. Brotherhood. And mission boards.
And mission boards, yes, absolutely.
Because I know
associational offices.
So I know we're seeking y'all's advice on a policy on coverage right now, right? As we're doing that right now. All right, so Jason, and again, I'm very biased, okay, because I worked with Brotherhood Mutual as a partner, and there are other church mutuals, another one out there. So I'm not. This is not simply an advertisement of Brotherhood Mutual. I want to advertise and convince of the concept of partnering with a insurance company that understands ministry, right? All right, so you use the word risk assessment. So for the average pastor, define risk assessment for us.
Yeah, so there can be some very technical definitions, and I should probably say through this all, but I am an insurance agent, not an attorney. So with things that I'll even talk about and even recommendations or things that we see with our churches, the best thing is always to consult with your insurance agent that you have for your ministry, who you're working with. If it gets into policies and procedures, you need to check with a local licensed attorney on what's best for your ministry with your conditions and local
and in your state, right? I mean, especially within your state, that's so crucial. Good. Okay, great.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. So risk management is the key thing. First of all, is identifying, assessing the exposures or risks that ministry has. So a lot of times when we talk about exposures for churches, they're like, exposure, what's an exposure? But risk is something that is more on their mind. So this could be the risk of their facilities, who's in their facilities, who's using the facilities and the buildings, parking lots. You have people that are just walking on the street and be on your church premises, can fall and break their leg. And now you have a potential med pay exposure that's there on your ministry's insurance policy. That person was even there for a service. They were just walking on your property.
Can I stop right there? Can I stop right there?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the mail carrier to our church, she pulls up right to the door, comes in, and she goes out and turns her ankle. Okay, and all of a sudden we get a workman's comp claim against her, and it's just the mail carrier. And obviously, I took a picture of the parking lot. I sent it to your company, and no, this is not a case. Okay, but what you just said is real life. So I had to park right there when you brought that up.
Yeah. It absolutely. I mean, so much of it on a daily basis, what ministries are going through. We just think about ministries on Sunday and a midweek Bible study, small groups meeting people's homes, but there's exposures on a daily basis for ministries. Yep. And that's a lot of what we do is we want ministries to understand that and to know how their policy needs to be structured to make sure that they're handling that. And from a risk management standpoint, are they doing what they need to do on their end, putting policies and procedures together, communicating to their staff, to their volunteers, to their church members about what they're doing, so that everybody's on the same page. Youth ministry is a big exposure. We think about defending the defenseless and who's working with your children and youth. I joke with some ministries to say, ideally, you don't want that person who just started coming last week to volunteer for the junior high overnighter trip that you're going to have across the state. It's not a good idea. You want to have people that have been there for a while. You want people, ideally that are members that then, if there's a church covenant or statement of faith, something that they're agreeing to, adhering to join, a little bit more of not just someone off the streets that's not and is looking to cause trouble at the church, but how do you do background checks? Who's getting those background checks done on? How frequently do you do them? And just assessing what are the activities that your youth are participating in. Facility use agreements is another thing too. When we talk about ministries facilities, who do you allow to use your ministries facilities, and then what requirements are in place? Right. You could have someone in your church that has a birthday party and they want to use the church fellowship hall for cake and ice cream and the open presents. Okay, there's that. And then you have AA or an HOA that wants to come and use your facilities, or a group that does not align with where the church's values are at and the exposure that's there in place. Could they sue for discrimination if you don't allow them to use your facilities? So all these things are exposures that are just giving real examples that we see with ministries on a daily basis that they're going through of assessing these exposures. And then so there's first assessing them, but proper risk management is going to be then taking steps to minimize the damage or containing the risk by proactively engaging their ministry leaders and members to minimize the potential of these exposures becoming a reality and having to deal with them potentially being an allegation or a suit that's brought against the ministry. It takes just one allegation. It takes one thing to be brought against the ministry that can do extreme devastation. All right, first of all, most importantly, to the name of Christ, but then to that church, to that community, because that's what people think of on that. So when you're doing risk management and you're identifying the exposures, the risks that your ministry has currently or potentially has because of what you're doing, and then you got to be proactive with what those exposures are and those risks that you have. And that way, one of the main things on this is church safety and security is one of the main ones on that, is because no ministry can guarantee that this Sunday that they're not going to have someone come in with a knife or a weapon or to have a domestic dispute, as someone who's disgruntled with a spouse, or there's a custody battle. And they come in and they're going to wreak havoc on your ministry, on the congregation, on your members, on people attending, the visitors that are coming for the first time. You can't guarantee that it's not going to happen for your ministry. So how can we be proactive with risk management to protect the church in these kind of circumstances, particularly today when we're talking about church safety and security?
All right, so let's back up. Now, I think it's very important to emphasize something you said. All it takes is one allegation.
Yes.
Right? Doesn't matter if it's true or not. The allegation can disrupt ministry. And so the assessment of what you're talking about helps just identify potential areas of it, what you would call exposure, right? Is that the way you want to word it? So we want to do the assessment and then minimize the risk associated with that assessment.
Yes.
Okay, so let's identify, if you can walk us down this path, what would be some major, as you assess and assist churches, because this is what you do. So you mentioned domestic violence. Okay, so can we just park right there first, Jason?
Sure.
And explain how would you minimize the risk? How would you assess that and then minimize the risk on something like domestic violence? Or let's define it first. Okay, let's define it.
Yeah, and domestic violence. Yeah, domestic violence. I mean, an example of that would be you're having a domestic dispute of particularly the one that we see the most common amongst churches is a spousal disgruntle where there's a
child custody
pastor for a minister. So yeah, it could be child custody, but you could even have counseling being given by leadership of the church to a spouse. And the disgruntled spouse is saying, I don't like the counseling that my wife or my husband's receiving from that ministry, from that church. And they go to take matters into their own hands by seeking out the pastor or that ministry leader. Could be midweek when maybe not as many people are there. They could do it on a Sunday morning and come in and try to take matters into their own hands in that situation. And it could be a very dangerous situation to find themselves in. As you mentioned, child protection, a child custody battle that can be taking place. And a lot of times with these situations, the members of the church, they don't know what's going on in these situations. For that matter, how much of that does the church leadership know about what's going on in the background on that? So being aware of that and communicating, especially with ushers, greeting teams, deacons, those are going to be sometimes that first line when people are coming to the church that we like to talk about. DLRs, doesn't look right. What are those things that just seem off as people are coming in? And there's just something different that's there, and greet them, talk to them, find out what's going on, and just how can I help you? Just those words can just disarm that person from getting them off track of what they were focused on doing, to then maybe just break down, get help, and say, I need to talk to somebody. You never know what can be taking place. But if you can have your ministry engaged for just looking for those things, we hope it doesn't happen, but we can't guarantee that it's not going to happen. And so that's why we want to make sure that ministries are proactive with that. And that's,
so let's back up to the safety and security team. All right. So because that's just where this is kind of, you keep mentioning that, and this is a key element. All right. So let me say this, doing ministry. All right. We've got to do ministry in our communities. It gets messy. If we're not, we can't be the ivory tower of just, perfect people, perfect theology, because then we're not reaching our Jerusalems. All right. But so as we're doing that, we got to be good stewards. And therefore, this is where companies like Brotherhood Mutual can come in and actually give guidelines of how to develop and train a safety and security team. You want to comment on that? Because I know how your company helped us develop our safety and security team. So just if let's say a church doesn't have it, or it's barely functional, how do you assess it, and then how does somebody like you come in and help train that?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most frequently asked questions our agency gets is, how do we get started with forming a church safety and security team? I think most ministries would just pull 3, 4, 5 ministries that they know in the area that they are associated with and know that are already doing it, or asking, hey, do you have something that we could mimic or look at and see if we could take the best of everybody's policies and form it into our own. But one of the key exposures that's there is that you want to make sure your insurance company knows what you're doing and has a policy in place, or doesn't have a policy in place. Does your policy involve volunteers carrying? South Carolina state law is that you have to have permission from church leadership to carry on church premises.
Right.
That's different than Georgia. That's different than North Carolina. Each state's going to be different on that, but you want to just not assume these kind of things, and putting those policies and procedures in place. If your insurance company is looking at this, say, okay, do you have policies and procedures in place? Are you allowing individuals to carry? They're going to want to know that, because that could affect how they cover your ministry.
Sure.
And so that's something that Brothers have been very proactive with, to say, we don't want ministries just trying to wing this and figure it out on their own. We want to put together something where they consulted some of the best experts in church safety and security. And then from the attorneys at Brotherhood Mutual that have written the policies, that how the coverages are going to apply, have come together to put together the Safe and Secure Church Kit, which will have some information in the show notes on how to get connected with that. Yeah. You can buy just a guidebook that provides the nuts and bolts of why should you put a team together, who should be on the team, should you allow individuals to carry, how many people should you allow to carry on the team, and then actually putting together the policies and procedures based on their template. You can use that template as your starting point, and then modify it for your ministry, which is a huge help for ministries to do that. And then you get the training with videos that they put together, walking through scenarios. Okay, your ministry's in this situation. This is the context. Here's the scenario that's played out. How would your ministry respond? And then your safety team can pause the video, talk about it as a group. Yeah. How would we respond with our current policies, procedures, and then see what best practices are. So it's just that counsel. When you have someone like Brother Mutual that's insuring now over 60,000 ministries across the country, across the entire United States, you're not the only ministry out there that's asking these kind of questions and wanting to do it in the best way possible. So that's why it's such a resource that Brotherhood can put together risk management resources like this for church safe and security teams. There is a promotional code right now to where you can save 25% on the Safe and Secure Church Kit on it. Just trying to make it affordable, but you can spend a lot of money in church safety and security training for ministries. So it's a great help when Brother can put that together for ministries.
Right. So let me piggyback on that for two illustrations. Number one, we did this. We took y'all's counsel. We then budgeted so the security team, safety and security team, would have money for, practice ammo to training. And I remember one Saturday they required the nursery workers to come in, and they rehearsed. A shooter comes in, and they actually fired blanks in the building so the nursery workers would be aware this is what it sounds like in this building if you hear gunfire. So I was just so impressed that, through some, guidance that y'all had given and other guidance, they took that training. And then let me say one other thing. Under the security, we had a family whose young teenage boy was a registered sexual offender in the state of South Carolina. So my first call was to who? Brotherhood Mutual. And so in this safety and security team, y'all helped us develop a policy that if a registered sex offender was in our church, this is what must take place to protect the youth. So you're the ones insuring us. But I will forget how thorough, you guys helped us. Now that didn't work out. They chose to go to a different church. But the fact you equipped us, you helped us assess the situation and then equipped us to then, all right, this is the policy and procedures that we'll put in place. So these are the kind of things you don't think about so y'all have been to that go-to source for that. All right, so so let's go back to domestic violence or disruptive individuals. You want to comment on disruptive? So again, we're talking about common problems that come into the church, domestic dispute, and then I think another one, somewhere along the way you mentioned was disrupted individuals. So you want to take off with that because this is a distraction. Is that the right wording? How do you want to? Yeah. And I love your wording. If it doesn't look right, okay, it doesn't look right.
It's easy. It's easy to just hang your hat on that to say, if it doesn't look right, it's like what's sticking? Something's not adding up here. Something seems off. A ministry in Tennessee on Easter Sunday a couple of years ago had a lady on their greeting team who identified a guy with a backpack trying to sneak off to the balcony of the church and just was like, I'm going to go and talk to this gentleman. So reached out, hey, welcome to our church and how you doing? And you can tell it got the guy off his course. Yeah. Stopped him and startled him for a minute and didn't know what to do. Come to find out, he had a backpack full of ammunition that he was taking up to the balcony for Easter Sunday, and it could have been a horrific situation for the ministry, but it was someone on the greeting team that was coming there using walkie-talkies to pull somebody in there. So these kind of disruptive situations, even you could have on the medical side disruptive. Someone who has a stroke or heart attack during a service. And there's that, how do you respond to the medical side of that disruptive aspect of it, which we could talk a lot about that. And normally we talk about the security, about active shooter situations, someone coming in with a gun to the church. But statistics are far more likely that your ministry is going to have a medical emergency happen in your ministry services than you are an active shooter situation. So those disruptive individuals, it could be I'm coming to cause harm. It's the custody battle. It's the domestic dispute. They could also be the person that's not intending to be disruptive, but they are because of unforeseen circumstances. But it makes people on edge. They don't know how to respond, and then they look to the church and to the leadership of how are they going to respond in this situation. You have someone that passes out in a service or has a stroke, and I don't know, for your years of doing it, you probably have had some kind of medical
heart attack and seizure.
Yes.
Two separate.
That brings things to a screeching halt when that takes place, because you want them to get the medical attention they need. So you just to know that these things can take place is part of the solution, to at least identify that, to be aware of it, and then to talk about as what's best for your ministry on putting together policies and procedures of how you're going to respond. Does it make sense for you to have a church safety team from the protecting your ministry's facilities, but does it also make sense for you to have a medical team together? Do you have medical professionals that are in your ministry that could step in and assist in a situation like that? So, when you look at it, there can be so many different ways that a service can be disrupted for ministries. And so wanting to be intentional with our approach with it, and having the conversation. That's where, for our ministries, we welcome them to call our team, call our office and talk to our service team, talk to our agents, because we much rather have that conversation with the ministry. Okay, we're thinking about doing this. We're looking at implementing some policies, procedures. Do you have some best practice resources? That's a much more pleasant conversation to have than to say, all right, so here's the situation that we're in right now, and we wish we would have contacted you a couple of months before to have this in. So it's just being proactive.
And let me follow up. So after y'all did ours at one point, our medical security team, or safety team, I guess you would say, medical safety team, as a pastor, we're used to having the answers theologically, but we're not prepared to handle medical emergencies. I never forget, I sat there and you all recommended to having an infant CPR team for the nurseries. That was so far. I mean, it's one of those things, guys, we can pray and study all you want to, and I just remember the confidence saying, wow, okay, we now have an infant CPR team trained and posted in the child, where the children stay. And I don't know, as you think about, because we all think about the children's being vulnerable, and you got the children area blocked off, and you got all the security for children's area. But anyway, that was kind of a rabbit trail. But I just never forget, as a pastor, of how comfortable I felt, once this was part of the assessment, and then, and part of the recommendation. So that's, again, just another specific example. Anything else on disruptive individuals or medical or security there? Because I want to shift into one other area here.
Yeah, I think on the medical side, just because there's a greater exposure for ministries than the active shooter situation. I'm not trying to dismiss the active shooter side, but
because that's real too.
The medical, it is real.
It's real.
And then how does your ministry respond to that? It's also, as you're identifying who those medical professionals are, your ministry. You have Good Samaritan law in South Carolina. For those that are not medical professionals, that's going to come to their aid. But for the medical professionals, malpractice is a real deal for them, that they have to weigh out how that's going to play into them stepping into that situation. So once again, talking to your insurance provider for your ministry's church insurance policy to see how is coverage going to work. I mean, you'd have to have that dialogue If I could stress of all this, and something that we talk to our ministries a lot of, especially ministries that are looking at reevaluating their insurance situation and not currently with us, is you can't assume insurance coverage. You can't make that assumption that, well, we're doing this. There's probably other churches that are doing it. The insurance company probably is aware of this, and it's probably fine.
Right.
It's probably going to be okay. You can't make assumptions with your ministry's insurance coverage. That's what you have to be proactive of reaching out and asking specific questions about, do we have coverage for this or that? If you ask a general question,
right,
chances are you're going to get a very general answer.
Sure.
Do we have coverage for our church safety team? Well, that's a very broad question. How granular do you want to go with that? So,
stop right. So, a church safety team. You mentioned about 3 things that could happen with a church safety team. So, one of them would be like excessive force, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
So, just pick up on you, because some things you mentioned were like three things that could happen, and of course we know that's 3 of a gazillion, but some concerns that really could happen to the safety and security team. All right, so we form it, right? We do all our research, right, Jason? And we come to you and you help us and we identify this. But so just the 3 you gave me, number 1 was they could be accused of excessive force. So what does that mean? What could that be?
If you have individuals in your ministry that are on the team and they need to take action in a situation where you do have an active shooter situation. You have someone who's a threat to your ministry's facilities, to your ministry's people, and you need to take action. Then you have that exposure of excessive force, and that of how do they take action. It could be as small as removing somebody from a service that's causing disruption.
Right.
He's being very vocal, very loud, causing people not to be able to worship, and you pull them out and they cause a scene. They sue for emotional embarrassment. Yeah. They come after the church with that. You could have that. You could have to where, if your church policy procedures have, where at a point as you're going through the checkpoints of your SOPs, your standing operating procedures of how your policy is to work, if it gets to that point where those that are carrying do have to fire their weapon at the individual, I mean, you're opening up that's a world from an insurance legal standpoint that, going back to what I said, you have to have that conversation with your insurance carrier on how they're going to provide coverage for that, because you have that, okay, well, it could have been handled in a different way, or the church safety team member didn't have to respond that way. There's a lot that comes into play with that, and where's the coverage going to come? Is that safety team member going to be just hanging out there by themselves, where they have to go purchase their own liability coverage? Yeah. Is it going to be on their homeowners coverage for liability coverage on that? So when you have, for Brotherhood to provide primary liability coverage for ministries, safety team for their churches, that's a huge deal. For that when they have to take action and actually jump into a situation and that, okay, now we're using force here. We're having to take matters into our own hands to get a hold of the situation. That can give insurance carriers significant heartburn in a situation like that.
All right, so let me make application to this. I know we're going a little bit long, and we'll come back, and I got another whole topic I want to talk to you about. Facilities and forms and to remove liability. So let's just park right here, safety and security, and then we can wrap this one up. But all right, so I want to give you, again, I have confidence in your company, but and if you're talking through this, guys, so that may never happen to us. And maybe everything happened to our church. I don't know. But 2 specific examples when you're talking about people being removed from the service and you could be exposed. We had a young man walk into the service about 10 minutes after it started. We minister in a college town, so it was a college-age kid with a black hoodie and a black backpack. Sat on the back row. And so our security team very quietly went out, just met him one-on-one and said, will you step into the lobby with us? But, you know, if that kid, he was pulled out of the service in front of, let's just say, 250 people, 200 people, whatever. If he really got offended at that age and maybe he was setting us up, he could have sued us for public embarrassment, right? I mean, that's real, right?
Yeah,
so this is what
real.
you're coming in and trying to help. You're trying to make sure the security and safety team can do what they can do as they are engaged in this part of the ministry. Is that a fair way to say it?
It's a very fair way to say it. You know, ministries, I think you alluded to earlier, for those that are in Bible college, they're training to become pastors and ministry leaders.
Yeah.
This isn't normally covered in most classes that they're going to be taking. I mean, this is the very nitty gritty of just the practical aspect of this is what happens in ministry. There's that side of it.
Yeah.
And we want our ministry leaders to be able to focus on ministry, on the furtherance of the gospel and their community, to their church, the discipleship that take place. But this is part of doing ministry. The other side of the coin in ministry is that exposure and that risk that's there. That it can happen. And as I said, can you authoritatively say that you're not going to have that domestic dispute, that active shooter situation, that medical emergency not happen this Sunday for your ministry? You can't.
No.
And then, in insurance in general, you're transferring risk. That's what insurance is. You're transferring the risk to your insurance carrier to say, they're going to provide coverage instead of us having to pay in the event that we find ourselves in a situation, those now endorsements on the policy to take care of that. So you have to utilize that in your insurance policy to make sure that they're covering you for those things so that you can focus on ministry. Because it's in doing this with almost 2,000 ministries that we partner with in South Carolina, I can't tell you how many times talking about, and we're talking about the particular lane here of church safety and security.
Yeah.
But it applies to so many others where you talk to the ministry leaders and it's like, we just didn't think it would happen here. We didn't think where our church was located at that it would happen here. We're a remote, rural ministry that people don't normally drive by much. You have to make an effort to get here to be at our services, and it happens.
Right.
So it's just don't have that perception of, okay, well, since it hasn't happened before, we're probably going to be fine. You don't want to. There's too much at stake. There's too much at stake for the ministry, for the name of Christ and the community, and you just want to be prepared and to have that conversation with people that can, as thankfully y'all were able to have for your ministry, say, we need help with this. What do we do? How do we put these things together in place?
Yeah. So, all right. So my next challenge, I want to start wrapping this up. Next challenge, I want to give a challenge to pastors. I can't get my words out. And here's why. All right. So our men work with Brotherhood Mutual, put together a safety and security manual training team. They all helped us. We put it together in writing, pages, training. And then they said this, you recommended more training in some area, and they had somebody put together a workshop, for it that y'all had somewhere along, found out through this, all the help that's available. And they said, Pastor, we want you to go. It's on a Saturday morning. I said, guys, I ain't got time. All right. But they convinced me to go. Jason, that was the most eye-opening Saturday morning I have spent in a long time of training that y'all had recommended through somebody. And so as a pastor, it changed my perspective on just the whole safety and security team, and how I as a pastor need to do all I could to equip and give these guys the tools they need so they could do what God had called them to do in our local church. So again, this is just, so I want to challenge the pastors that if your security team wants you to go to a Saturday morning seminar or whenever it is, take the time to go to it to show them the support that they need. So, I just wanted to say that. So again, I've had experience with your company of helping us partner. The way I introduced this, partnering with us. So again, we're going to put your email address in the show notes, and you can farm that out if somebody requests that. All right, so give me a 2-minute wrap up on safety and security team, and we'll have to come back and cover the rest of it later podcast. So give us your burden as both a theologically trained pastor which you are, and someone that's helping churches with risk assessment and managing that risk. So give us a 1 minute, 2 minute summary, Jason.
There have been approximately 25 that we identified, 25 attacks on churches since Columbine High School's shooting. And there's been, of that, probably 5, it looks like right now, 5 in 2022 alone. Wow. A domestic dispute, an active shooter situation. Just this past week, there was a shooting at a church van in our state that took place.
Wow.
You look at these things, and the exposure that's there, we're past the point of, oh, I should probably be aware of it. It's been on everybody's minds for a few decades now, particularly in the last decade in our state when we look at it. So
now you're referring back, wait a minute. So we're in South Carolina. So you're referring back to the Charleston shooting? Is that what you're, okay.
Yeah, so Mother Emanuel, Amy with that shooting.
And that was at night, right? That was an evening service, if I remember right.
It was so that was not your Sunday morning traditional. That was a midweek Bible study that they allowed the individual, they had them come in and had the backpack, and it sat into the service for a while. So you look at these things, it's happening it's far too often been happening to where ministries have to be on guard and be ready for this, to not have a head in the sand approach. And I think that's, we're doing the work of the ministry. We're doing what God's called us to do. Yes, and please do that. But at the same time, be aware of the exposure that's there. That as people are coming to your ministry to worship and to serve and be part of plugging into the body, there is an expectation that you're going to protect them as well from harm that comes. Yes. So have a conversation with your leadership, with your deacons, with your trustees, with your church safety team, just those that have that desire to protect the church as well, and see how can we be proactive even this Sunday of helping to prevent some of these things to occur, that we can identify them and then we have a plan to do it. So that's my biggest thing is just start with the conversation. There's a lot to unpack on it, but that's the key point is just engage in the conversation and not have that approach of, well, it hasn't happened to us so far, so we should be okay. That's a very poor approach to take for church safety and security.
All right. And when you keep talking, these comments keep back up. So also, especially in the South where we minister, the thinking is we got 12 people concealed carry in our church, we're covered. No, you're not, right? Because because they got a concealed carry doesn't mean they're allowed to carry in the church, right? I mean, this is South Carolina. So what I'm saying is don't assume because you got some great ex-military or ex-policemen that really may know how to handle a firearm, but don't assume that your church is covered. You must go and talk to whoever's got your insurance. That just came to my mind. So
absolutely, yes. Don't make assumptions on your coverage on that. And 12 people having a gun. Ministries that say we just want as many people to carry as possible can be a very dangerous situation. Yes, crossfire.
Okay. So pastors, deacons, maybe you're well equipped in this. I don't know. I was not. Okay. So I beg of you to find out how you are covered and make sure you are covered, because one allegation or one wrong move and your ministry will no longer be, or may not. Your ministry may survive it, but it will not be as effective. Okay. All right, Jason. Hey, lots. Thanks for your burden for the Church of Christ and how much you help us, and we just appreciate it. So we'll do another podcast on the other burdens later. Okay. Jason,
sounds great.
And we'll put this in the show notes and we'll catch up. All right. Thank you so much.
Sounds great, Marsh. Thank you, sir.
You're listening to ReChurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.